Elijah, a brave 10-year-old boy, never imagined he'd have to face his worst fear to save his friend. For weeks, he noticed strange behavior around his neighborhood. A man lurking where he shouldn't be, his young neighbor Lily acting more scared than usual, but he couldn't quite put his finger on it. Then, one fateful day, he saw the unthinkable, Lily being dragged into the woods by the stranger. Elijah's instincts kicked in, and he did something that changed everything. What made the man run away that day? And how did Elijah's quick thinking help the police unravel a dark secret that haunted their community? Stay tuned to find out. And before we dive into this story of bravery, let us know where you're watching from today. If Elijah's courage and determination resonate with you, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. As we walk through his journey, we invite you to share your thoughts and experiences. Have you ever witnessed something that made you step up and take action? How did you handle it? Your stories matter, and we'd love to hear them. The sun hung low in the sky, painting the quiet suburban neighborhood in warm hues of orange and gold. 10-year-old Elijah sat perched on his favorite branch of the old oak tree in his front yard, his keen eyes scanning the familiar streets. He loved this spot. It gave him the perfect vantage point to watch over his little corner of the world. As the evening shadows grew longer, Elijah's gaze fell on a small figure skipping down the sidewalk. It was Lily, the 6-year-old girl from next door, her blonde pigtails bouncing with each step. A smile tugged at Elijah's lips as he watched her, feeling a surge of protective affection for the little girl he considered a sister. Suddenly, a chill ran down Elijah's spine. From the corner of his eye, he caught a flicker of movement, a tall, shadowy figure emerging from between two houses. Before Elijah could even process what was happening, the stranger lunged forward, grabbing Lily around the waist. "Hey!" Elijah shouted, his heart pounding in his chest. But his cry was drowned out by Lily's terrified scream. The stranger, a man in a dark hoodie, began dragging Lily towards the dense woods that bordered their neighborhood. Elijah's mind raced, panic threatening to overwhelm him. But something deeper, a fierce instinct to protect, took over. Without a second thought, Elijah leaped from his perch, hitting the ground running. His sneakers pounded against the pavement as he sprinted after Lily and her captor. "Let her go," he yelled, his voice cracking with fear and determination. As they neared the tree line, Elijah's heart felt like it might burst from his chest. He had to do something, anything, to save Lily. The world seemed to slow down, and then rewind to just a few weeks earlier, and life in Maplewood Estates couldn't have been more different. Elijah Martinez sat at his desk, his tongue poking out of the corner of his mouth as he concentrated on his math homework. The late afternoon sunlight streamed through his bedroom window, illuminating the posters of superheroes and space shuttles that covered his walls. "Elijah, come down for dinner, honey," his mom's voice called from downstairs. "Coming, Mom," Elijah replied, scribbling down one last answer before bounding down the stairs, taking them two at a time. In the kitchen, the savory aroma of his mom's famous enchiladas filled the air. Elijah's dad was already at the table, his phone set aside as he helped Elijah's little sister, Sophia, into her booster seat. "There's my math whiz," Dad said with a grin as Elijah slid into his chair. "How's the homework coming along, buddy?" Elijah shrugged, reaching for a warm tortilla. "It's okay. Some of the fractions are tricky, but I think I've got it figured out." His mom ruffled his hair as she set a plate in front of him. "That's my smart boy, always figuring things out." As they ate, Elijah's mind wandered to the events of the day. At school, he'd helped his friend Max stand up to a group of older kids who were picking on him. It wasn't the first time Elijah had stepped in to defend someone, and he knew it wouldn't be the last. "You've got that look again," his dad observed, interrupting Elijah's thoughts. "What's on your mind, son?" Elijah hesitated for a moment before speaking. "Dad, is it wrong to get involved when you see someone being mean to someone else?" His parents exchanged a glance before his mom leaned in, her eyes serious but kind. "Elijah, standing up for what's right is never wrong. But it's important to be smart about it, and know when to ask for help from a grown-up." His dad nodded in agreement. "Your mom's right. We're proud that you want to help others, but we also want you to be safe. Promise us you'll always come to us or a teacher if something serious is happening. Okay?" Elijah nodded solemnly, feeling a warmth in his chest at his parents' words. He knew they worried about him sometimes, But he couldn't help it. When he saw something wrong, he had to try and make it right. After dinner, Elijah helped clear the table before heading outside to enjoy the last bit of daylight. As he stepped onto the front porch, he spotted a familiar figure next door. "Hi, Elijah," Lily called out, waving enthusiastically from her driveway, where she was drawing with chalk. Elijah jogged over, grinning at the little girl's excitement. "Hey, Lily, what's ya drawing?" Lily beamed up at him, her blue eyes sparkling. "It's us. See?" She pointed to two stick figures, one tall with spiky hair, the other small with yellow pigtails. "You're the superhero, and I'm your sidekick." Elijah felt a surge of affection for the little girl. Ever since the Thompsons had moved in next door a year ago, Lily had latched onto Elijah like a little sister. At first, he'd found it annoying to have a 6-year-old trailing after him, but her sweet nature and unwavering admiration had quickly won him over. "That's awesome, Lily," he said, crouching down to admire her artwork. "But you know what? I think you'd make a pretty great superhero yourself." Lily's eyes widened. "Really? You think so?" "Absolutely," Elijah nodded. "You're brave, kind, and always trying to help others. That's what being a hero is all about." A delighted giggle escaped Lily as she threw her arms around Elijah's neck. "You're the best, Elijah. Will you play superheroes with me?" Before Elijah could answer, a voice called out from the Thompsons' house. "Lily, sweetie, time to come in and get ready for bed." Lily's face fell for a moment before brightening again. "Okay, Mommy." "Elijah, will you play with me tomorrow after school?" "Sure thing, kiddo," Elijah promised, giving her a gentle nudge towards her house. "Sweet dreams, Lily." As he watched Lily skip inside, Elijah couldn't help but feel a twinge of concern. He knew the Thompsons were good people, but their demanding jobs often left Lily to her own devices. More than once, he'd spotted her playing alone in the front yard or wandering the neighborhood unsupervised. Shaking off the uneasy feeling, Elijah turned to head back to his own house. As he did, something caught his eye, a flicker of movement in the shadows between two houses across the street. He squinted, trying to make out what it was, but whatever he'd seen was gone. For a moment, Elijah considered investigating, but his dad's words from earlier echoed in his mind. With a shrug, he chalked it up to his imagination and went inside, unaware of how significant that fleeting moment would soon become. As the days grew shorter and autumn leaves began to paint the neighborhood in shades of red and gold, an unsettling change crept over Maplewood Estates. Elijah, ever observant, couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. His keen eyes, which once scanned the streets for the ice cream truck or friends to play with, now searched for something more sinister. It started with fleeting glimpses, a shadow moving between houses when it shouldn't, the rustle of leaves from an empty park. At first, Elijah dismissed these as tricks of the light or his overactive imagination. But as the occurrences became more frequent, a nagging sense of unease settled in his gut. One crisp Saturday morning, Elijah perched in his favorite oak tree, a book balanced on his knees. As he turned a page, movement across the street caught his eye. A man he didn't recognize was standing at the corner, partially hidden behind a large maple tree. There was nothing overtly threatening about him. He wore jeans and a dark jacket, his face obscured by the brim of a baseball cap. But something about the way he stood, perfectly still, sent a chill down Elijah's spine. The man's gaze seemed fixed on the playground where a group of younger kids, including Lily, were playing. Elijah watched, his book forgotten, as the stranger's head moved slowly, tracking the children's movements. After what felt like an eternity, but was probably only a few minutes, the man turned and walked away, disappearing around the corner. Elijah's heart raced. Should he tell someone? But what if he was wrong? What if it was just some new neighbor or someone's relative visiting? He didn't want to cause a panic over nothing. Still, he made a mental note to keep an eye out for the man in the future. Over the next few days, Elijah spotted the stranger several more times. Always at a distance, always watching. The man never approached anyone or did anything overtly suspicious, but his constant presence set Elijah's nerves on edge. One afternoon, as Elijah walked home from school, he saw the man again. This time, he was leaning against a telephone pole, pretending to look at his phone. But Elijah noticed how the man's eyes kept darting up, scanning the area. Swallowing hard, Elijah decided to test his suspicions. He veered off his usual path, taking a different route home. Sure enough, when he glanced back, the man had moved, following at a distance. Elijah's pulse quickened. He wasn't imagining things. Something was definitely not right. That night at dinner, Elijah pushed his food around his plate, lost in thought. His mom noticed his distraction. "Everything okay, honey?" she asked, concern etching her features. "You've barely touched your lasagna, and it's your favorite." Elijah looked up, meeting his parents' worried gazes. He took a deep breath. "Mom, Dad, I think I've seen a strange man watching kids in the neighborhood." His parents exchanged a glance. His dad leaned forward, his voice gentle but serious. "What do you mean, son? Tell us exactly what you've seen." Elijah recounted his observations, the man's repeated appearances, how he always seemed to be watching the children, and how he had followed Elijah that afternoon. As he spoke, he saw his parents' expressions grow more concerned. When he finished, his mom reached out and squeezed his hand. "Elijah, thank you for telling us. You did the right thing." His dad nodded in agreement. "We'll call the police and let them know. In the meantime, I want you to be extra careful. Don't go anywhere alone, and if you see this man again, come straight home or find a trusted adult immediately. Understand?" Elijah nodded solemnly, feeling a mix of relief at having shared his burden and anxiety about the situation. That night, he lay awake long after his parents had gone to bed, his mind racing with worries and what-ifs. The next day, Elijah kept a watchful eye out for the stranger, but the man was nowhere to be seen. Instead, he noticed something else that troubled him, a marked change in Lily's behavior. Usually bubbly and adventurous, Lily seemed subdued and nervous. When Elijah invited her to play at the park after school, she hesitated, her big blue eyes darting around anxiously. I don't know, Elijah," she mumbled, scuffing her shoe against the ground. "Maybe we could just play in my backyard instead." Elijah frowned. Lily loved the park. It was usually impossible to keep her away from the swings and monkey bars. "Sure, if that's what you want," he said carefully. "But is everything okay, Lily? You seem kind of scared." Lily bit her lip, looking down at her feet. "It's just, I saw a scary man at the park the other day. He was watching me, and it made me feel yucky inside." Elijah's blood ran cold. "What did this man look like, Lily?" he asked, trying to keep his voice calm. "He was tall like my dad and wore a dark jacket and a hat," Lily said, her voice barely above a whisper. "He didn't say anything, but he kept staring at me. I told Mommy and Daddy, but they said he was probably just waiting for someone and not to worry. But I don't like it when he looks at me." Elijah's mind raced. It had to be the same man he'd seen. He knelt down, looking Lily in the eye. "Listen to me, Lily. If you ever see that man again, I want you to run away as fast as you can and find a grown-up you trust, okay? Promise me?" Lily nodded solemnly, her eyes wide. "I promise, Elijah." From that day on, Elijah noticed that Lily avoided her once-favorite spots around the neighborhood. The park sat empty, her chalk forgotten on the driveway. Even the ice cream truck's cheerful jingle failed to lure her out. It broke Elijah's heart to see the usually vivacious little girl so subdued, and it strengthened his resolve to figure out what was going on. As days passed, the atmosphere in Maplewood Estates grew increasingly tense. Parents huddled in worried groups at bus stops, and missing pet posters began to appear alongside neighborhood watch flyers. Elijah couldn't shake the feeling that these weren't just coincidences. Then, on a foggy Tuesday morning, it happened. The encounter that would change everything. Elijah had woken up early, unable to sleep. He decided to take his dog, Max, for a quick walk before school. The streets were quiet, most of the neighborhood still asleep. As they rounded the corner near the park, Elijah froze. There, standing at the edge of the playground, was the man. In the early morning light, Elijah could finally see him clearly. He was tall and lean, with sharp features partially hidden by the brim of his ever-present cap. But it was his eyes that made Elijah's blood run cold, pale, and calculating. They seemed to bore right through him. For a moment, they just stared at each other. Then, slowly, deliberately, the man's lips curled into a smirk. He raised a finger to his lips in a shushing motion, his eyes never leaving Elijah's. Max growled low in his throat, hackles raised. The sound seemed to break the spell. Elijah stumbled backward, his heart pounding so hard he thought it might burst from his chest. Without a word, he turned and ran, Max loping beside him, all the way back home. Elijah burst through his front door, startling his mom who was in the kitchen making breakfast. "Elijah, what on earth?" she began, but stopped short when she saw his pale face and wild eyes. "Honey, what happened?" Between gasping breaths, Elijah recounted his encounter. His mom listened, her face growing more worried with each word. When he finished, she pulled him into a tight hug. "Oh, sweetheart," she murmured, stroking his hair. "It's okay. You're safe now." She pulled back, her eyes serious. "I'm calling the police right away. And you're not walking to school anymore? I'll drive you." As his mom made the call, Elijah sank onto the couch, his mind reeling. The man's smirk, that deliberately threatening gesture. It was clear now that this was no harmless stranger. Whatever was happening in Maplewood Estates, this man was at the center of it. For the rest of the day, Elijah felt like he was in a fog. He went through the motions at school, but his mind kept replaying the morning's events. By the time the final bell rang, he had made a decision. He couldn't just sit back and wait for something terrible to happen. He had to do something. As he walked home, his mom hadn't been able to pick him up due to a work emergency. Elijah's mind raced with plans. He would start keeping a detailed log of every time he saw the man. He'd talk to other kids in the neighborhood, see if anyone else had noticed anything suspicious. And most importantly, he'd keep a close eye on Lily. Whatever this man was up to, Elijah was determined to stop him. Lost in thought, Elijah almost didn't notice the dark sedan crawling along the street beside him. When he did, his heart leapt into his throat. Through the tinted window, he could just make out a familiar face, the man from the park. Panic surged through Elijah. He quickened his pace, trying not to look like he was running. The car kept pace, moving slowly alongside him. Elijah's palms were sweating, his breath coming in short gasps. He was still 2 blocks from home. Just as Elijah was about to break into a run, a familiar voice called out, "Elijah, wait up." He turned to see Lily's dad, Mr. Thompson, jogging towards him from the opposite direction. The sedan's engine revved, and it sped away, turning the corner and disappearing from sight. "Hey there, sport," Mr. Thompson said as he reached Elijah. "You okay? You look a little pale." Elijah nodded, not trusting his voice. Mr. Thompson frowned, looking in the direction the car had gone. "Was that car bothering you? I thought it was moving awfully slow." Swallowing hard, Elijah managed to find his voice. I think it might have been the man my mom called the police about this morning." Mr. Thompson's expression darkened. "Come on," he said, putting a protective arm around Elijah's shoulders. "I'll walk you home, and I think it's time we had a neighborhood meeting about all this." As they walked, Elijah felt a mix of relief and determination. He was grateful for Mr. Thompson's presence, but he knew this was far from over. The man in the car might have been scared off for now, but Elijah was certain he'd be back. That night, as Elijah lay in bed, his mind whirled with everything that had happened. The stranger's smirk, the slow-moving car, Lily's fear. It all pointed to something sinister brewing in their once peaceful neighborhood. As he drifted off to sleep, Elijah made a silent vow. He would protect Lily and all the other kids in Maplewood Estates, no matter what it took. Little did he know, his courage would soon be put to the ultimate test. The morning dawned crisp and clear, a perfect autumn day in Maplewood Estates. Elijah woke early, his mind still buzzing with worry about the strange man and the unsettling events of the past few weeks. As he got ready for school, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was going to happen today. "Be extra careful today, honey," his mom said as she dropped him off at school. "Remember, I'll pick you up this afternoon." Elijah nodded, giving her a reassuring smile. "I will, Mom. Don't worry." But as the day wore on, Elijah's sense of unease grew. He found himself constantly looking over his shoulder, jumping at every unexpected noise. By the time the final bell rang, he was a bundle of nerves. To his dismay, his mom texted him just as school let out. "Stuck in traffic. We'll be 15 minutes late. Wait inside the school building." He texted back, "Okay, Mom." As he waited for his mom, his mind drifted back to thoughts of the strange man and how her mom had informed him that the police had increased their patrols throughout the area in response to multiple reports of concern from the parents in their neighborhood. In the evening, Elijah sat perched on his favorite branch of the old oak tree in his front yard, his keen eyes scanning the familiar streets. Suddenly, a chill ran down Elijah's spine. From the corner of his eye, he caught a flicker of movement, a tall, shadowy figure emerging from between two houses. Before Elijah could even process what was happening, the stranger lunged forward, grabbing Lily around the waist. Lily's muffled scream made his blood run cold. Elijah broke into a run, his heart pounding. As he rounded the corner near the woods that bordered their neighborhood, he saw a sight that would be seared into his memory forever. There, at the edge of the trees, was the strange man, and in his grasp, kicking and struggling, was Lily. For a moment, Elijah froze, paralyzed by fear and disbelief. This couldn't be happening. Not here, not to Lily. The man was dragging her towards the dense woods, his hand clamped over her mouth to muffle her screams. Something snapped inside Elijah. Without thinking, he cupped his hands around his mouth and yelled at the top of his lungs, "Hey! Let her go!" The man's head whipped around, his eyes widening in surprise at the sight of Elijah. For a split second, his grip on Lily loosened. Elijah didn't waste a moment. He bent down, scooped up a handful of rocks from the ground, and started hurling them at the man. "Help!" he screamed, his voice cracking with fear and determination. "Somebody help! He's taking Lily." The first rock missed, but the second struck the man's shoulder. He stumbled, momentarily releasing Lily. She wrenched free of his grasp and started running towards Elijah. "Run, Lily!" Elijah shouted, still pelting the man with rocks and sticks. "Run as fast as you can." Lily sprinted towards him, tears streaming down her face. The man, recovering from his surprise, started after her. But Elijah kept up his barrage, yelling and throwing anything he could get his hands on. "Stay away from her," he screamed, his fear giving way to fierce protectiveness. "Leave her alone." Just as the man was about to grab Lily again, a stick Elijah threw caught him square in the face. He yelped in pain, stumbling backward. Lily reached Elijah, throwing herself into his arms with a sob. He held her tight, his own body shaking with adrenaline and fear. But he didn't take his eyes off the man, who was now glaring at them with a mixture of rage and calculation. "It's okay, Lily," Elijah murmured, trying to sound braver than he felt. "I've got you. You're safe now." The man took a step towards them, his face contorted with anger. Elijah's heart raced. He knew he couldn't outrun the man while carrying Lily, but he'd be damned if he'd let go of her now. Just then, a door slammed in the distance. "What's going on out there?" a voice called. The man's head snapped towards the sound. More doors were opening now, curious neighbors drawn by the commotion. "Help!" Elijah yelled again, his voice hoarse. "Please, somebody help us." The man looked from Elijah and Lily to the gathering neighbors, clearly weighing his options. With a snarl of frustration, he turned and bolted into the woods. Elijah's legs gave out, and he sank to the ground, still clutching Lily tightly. She was sobbing into his chest, her small body racked with tremors. "Elijah! Lily!" Mr. Thompson's voice cut through the air as he ran towards them, followed closely by Mrs. Rodriguez and several other neighbors. "Oh my God! Are you two all right?" Elijah looked up, his vision blurry with unshed tears. He tried to take Lily, he managed to choke out. "The strange man." He grabbed her and tried to drag her into the woods. Mr. Thompson's face paled. He knelt down beside them, gently trying to pry Lily from Elijah's arms. But she clung tighter, whimpering. "No, Daddy," she sobbed. "I want to stay with Elijah. He saved me." "Okay, sweetheart," Mr. Thompson said softly, his voice shaking. He looked at Elijah, his eyes filled with a mixture of gratitude and horror. "What happened, son?" As more neighbors gathered around, Elijah recounted the terrifying events, his voice growing steadier as he spoke. He told them about hearing Lily scream, about throwing rocks and sticks to distract the man, about how Lily had managed to break free. "He ran into the woods," Elijah finished, pointing with a trembling hand. "Just a minute ago." "I've called the police," Mrs. Rodriguez said, her cell phone still in her hand. "They're on their way." Mr. Thompson stood up, his face set in grim determination. "We need to search those woods," he said. "That bastard can't have gotten far." "No." Lily cried, her grip on Elijah tightening. Don't go, Daddy. He might hurt you too. Mr. Thompson hesitated, torn between the desire to chase down the man who had tried to take his daughter and the need to comfort her. She's right, Mrs. Rodriguez said firmly. We should wait for the police. They'll be better equipped to handle this. The sound of sirens in the distance seemed to underscore her point. Mr. Thompson nodded reluctantly, kneeling back down beside Elijah and Lily. You're right, he said softly. The most important thing is that you're safe. He looked at Elijah, his eyes brimming with tears. Thank you, Elijah. You saved my little girl. I don't know how I can ever repay you. Elijah shook his head, feeling overwhelmed. I just did what anyone would do, he mumbled. No, son, Mr. Thompson said firmly. What you did was incredibly brave. You're a hero. As the police cars pulled up, lights flashing, the full impact of what had just happened began to sink in. Elijah felt a wave of delayed shock wash over him. He had faced down a kidnapper. He had saved Lily. But the man was still out there, somewhere in those woods. The next few hours passed in a blur. Police officers swarmed the area, taking statements and organizing a search of the woods. Elijah's parents arrived, alerted by the commotion in the neighborhood. His mom engulfed him in a tearful hug, alternating between scolding him for not waiting at school and praising his bravery. Through it all, Lily refused to leave Elijah's side. Even when the paramedics arrived to check them both over, she insisted on holding his hand. Her parents didn't try to separate them, seeming to understand that Elijah's presence was comforting to their traumatized daughter. As evening fell, the police regrouped near the edge of the woods. The lead detective, a stern-faced woman named Officer Chun, approached the gathered neighbors. We've conducted a thorough search of the immediate area, she announced, her voice grave. Unfortunately, we haven't been able to locate the suspect. It appears he managed to escape through the woods. A murmur of fear and disappointment rippled through the crowd. Elijah felt a chill run down his spine. The man was still out there. Officer Chun held up a hand for silence. We're expanding our search and have alerted neighboring precincts. We will find this man. She turned to Elijah, her expression softening slightly. Thanks to this young man's brave actions and excellent description, we have a good idea of who we're looking for. We've also gathered physical evidence that will help us identify him. She knelt down, addressing Elijah directly. You did a very brave thing today, son. You should be proud of yourself. Elijah nodded, feeling a mix of pride and lingering fear. But what if he comes back, he asked, voicing the worry that had been gnawing at him. Officer Chen's face turned serious. We're going to have increased patrols in the area, she assured him, and we'll be working closely with your neighborhood watch. But I need you all to stay vigilant. Report any suspicious activity immediately. As the crowd began to disperse, Elijah overheard snippets of worried conversations. Parents discussing new safety measures, neighbors planning watch rotations. The sense of security that had once blanketed Maplewood Estates had been shattered. Elijah, his dad said softly, placing a hand on his shoulder. We should head home now. It's been a long day. Elijah nodded, suddenly feeling exhausted. But as he started to stand, Lily's grip on his hand tightened. No, she whimpered, looking up at him with tearful eyes. Don't go, Elijah. I'm scared. Elijah looked helplessly at his parents and the Thompsons. Mr. Thompson knelt down beside his daughter. Sweetheart, he said gently, Elijah needs to go home and rest. He's had a big day too. Lily shook her head stubbornly. But what if the bad man comes back? Elijah saved me. I feel safe with him. The adults exchanged glances, a silent conversation passing between them. Finally, Mrs. Thompson spoke up. Why don't you come over to our house for a while, Elijah? She suggested. If it's okay with your parents, of course. I think it would help Lily feel better, and frankly, I'd feel better knowing you were close by too. Elijah looked at his parents hopefully. After a moment, his mom nodded. I think that's a good idea, she said. We'll be right next door if you need anything. As they walked to the Thompsons' house, Elijah couldn't help but scan the darkening streets nervously. The woods that bordered their neighborhood, once a place of adventure and imagination, now loomed ominously in the twilight. Inside, Mrs. Thompson busied herself making hot chocolate, while Mr. Thompson called Lily's pediatrician for advice on helping her process the traumatic event. Lily curled up next to Elijah on the couch, her small hand still clutching his. "You really were brave today, Elijah," she said softly, her voice muffled against his shoulder. Like a real superhero. Elijah managed a small smile, giving her hand a gentle squeeze. "You were brave too, Lily. You fought back and ran when you had the chance. That was really smart." Lily nodded, her eyelids drooping with exhaustion. "I was so scared," she admitted. "But then I heard you yelling, and I knew everything would be okay." As Lily drifted off to sleep, Elijah felt a fierce surge of protectiveness. He might only be 10 years old, but in that moment, he vowed to always look out for Lily and the other kids in the neighborhood. The man might have escaped today, but Elijah was determined to keep his community safe. Outside, the police lights still flashed, casting eerie shadows through the windows. The danger wasn't over, Elijah knew. The man was still out there, somewhere in the darkness beyond their peaceful streets. But for now, in this moment, Lily was safe. And Elijah had discovered a strength within himself he never knew he possessed. As he sipped his hot chocolate and listened to the concerned murmur of adult voices in the kitchen, Elijah's mind raced with plans. He would talk to Officer Chin tomorrow, see if there was anything else he could do to help catch the man. He'd work with the neighborhood watch, maybe even start a kids' safety club at school. The stranger had picked the wrong neighborhood, the wrong kids to mess with. Elijah might be young, but he was far from helpless. And he was determined to prove it. With Lily's steady breathing beside him and the comforting sounds of the Thompsons' home around him, Elijah felt his own eyes growing heavy. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new fears to face. But he would face them head-on, with the same courage he'd found within himself today. As he drifted off to sleep, Elijah's last conscious thought was a mix of determination and hope. They would catch the man, their neighborhood would be safe again, and he, Elijah, would do whatever it took to make sure of it. The night settled over Maplewood Estates, a neighborhood forever changed by the events of the day. But in that change, a young hero had emerged. And though the danger still lurked in the shadows, hope burned bright in the heart of a brave 10-year-old boy. In the days following the attempted kidnapping, Maplewood Estates seemed to hold its collective breath. The once bustling streets were eerily quiet, with parents keeping their children indoors and neighbors eyeing each other with a mix of suspicion and shared fear. The woods that bordered the community, once a place of adventure and play, now loomed as a dark reminder of the danger that had invaded their peaceful lives. Elijah found himself unable to sleep through the night, jolting awake at every creak and rustle. His dreams were filled with shadowy figures and Lily's terrified screams. Each morning, he'd rush to his window, scanning the street to make sure Lily was safe in her home next door. At school, Elijah noticed the changes immediately. Extra security guards patrolled the hallways, and teachers kept a watchful eye on the playground during recess. Many of his classmates whispered about the scary man in the woods, their young minds spinning wild theories and ghost stories. But for Elijah, the fear was all too real. He couldn't shake the image of the man's cold eyes or the sound of Lily's muffled cries. During lunch, he overheard two of his friends discussing the incident. "I heard the man was like 7 feet tall and had claws," one boy said, his eyes wide. "No way," another countered. "My dad said he was probably just some druggie looking for money." Elijah clenched his fists under the table, fighting the urge to shout at them. They had no idea how truly terrifying it had been, how close they had come to losing Lily forever. After school, Elijah insisted on walking Lily home with her dad, Mr. Thompson. As they walked, he noticed how Lily jumped at every sudden noise, her small hand clinging tightly to his. "It's okay, Lily," he said softly, trying to sound braver than he felt. "I'm right here. I won't let anything happen to you." Lily looked up at him, her blue eyes brimming with a mix of fear and trust. "Promise," she whispered. Elijah nodded solemnly. "I promise. I'll always look out for you, Lily, no matter what." As they reached Lily's house, Mrs. Thompson rushed out to greet them, enveloping Lily in a tight hug. She gave Elijah a grateful smile. "Thank you for walking her home, Elijah. You're such a good friend to her." Mr. Thompson also gave him a pat on the back. "Thank you, son." Elijah nodded, but as he turned to leave, a chill ran down his spine. For a moment, he could have sworn he saw a shadow move between the houses across the street. His heart raced as he hurried home, constantly looking over his shoulder. That night, as his family sat down to dinner, Elijah's dad cleared his throat. "I spoke with Officer Chin today," he said, his voice grave. "They're intensifying the search for the suspect. They want to talk to you again, Elijah. See if you can remember any more details." Elijah nodded, pushing his food around his plate. "Do they think he's still around here?" he asked, voicing the fear that had been gnawing at him. His mom reached out, squeezing his hand. "We don't know, honey, but the police are doing everything they can to find him, and we're all going to be extra careful until they do." The next day, Officer Chin arrived at their house. She sat with Elijah in the living room, her kind eyes belying the seriousness of her expression. "You've been very brave, Elijah," she said. "The information you've given us has been incredibly helpful. But I need you to think hard. Was there anything else about the man that stood out? Any little detail could be important." Elijah closed his eyes, forcing himself to relive that terrifying moment. He had a scar," he said suddenly, the memory surfacing. "On his left hand. It looked like a burn or something." Officer Chin's eyes lit up. She jotted down the information quickly. "That's excellent, Elijah. Anything else? Did you notice any smells or hear him say anything?" Elijah shook his head, feeling frustrated. "I'm sorry. I can't remember anything else." "You've done more than enough," Officer Chin assured him. "Your quick thinking and bravery have given us a lot to work with. We're going to find him, Elijah. I promise you that." As the days stretched into weeks, the tension in Maplewood Estates seemed to reach a breaking point. Parents argued at PTA meetings about security measures, and the neighborhood watch ballooned to include almost every adult in the community. Elijah found himself constantly on edge, jumping at shadows and scrutinizing every unfamiliar face he saw. One crisp Saturday morning, nearly a month after the incident, Elijah was helping his dad rake leaves in their front yard. He kept glancing across the street to where Lily was playing in her own yard, her parents keeping a watchful eye from the porch. Suddenly, a police car pulled up in front of Elijah's house. His heart leapt into his throat as Officer Chin stepped out, her face unreadable. "Elijah," she called, walking briskly towards them. "Is your mom home? I need to speak with your family." Elijah's dad dropped the rake, his face pale. "What's happened?" he asked, his voice tight with worry. "Let's talk inside," Officer Chin said quietly. As they gathered in the living room, Elijah's mind raced with possibilities. Had something happened to someone else? Was the man back in the neighborhood? Officer Chin took a deep breath, her eyes scanning their anxious faces. "I have some news," she began. "We've made arrests in connection with the attempted kidnapping." Elijah felt a rush of relief, quickly followed by confusion. "Arrests?" he echoed. "More than one?" Officer Chin nodded grimly. "We've apprehended the man who tried to take Lily, along with 2 accomplices. They were part of a larger criminal operation." Elijah's mom gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. "What kind of operation?" Officer Chin's face darkened. "I'm afraid it's worse than we initially thought. These individuals were part of a human trafficking ring, targeting children in quiet, suburban neighborhoods like yours." The words hit Elijah like a physical blow. Human trafficking. He'd heard the term before, but only in the context of far-off places, not here in their peaceful community. How? How did you find them?" Elijah's dad asked, his voice shaking. "It was actually thanks to Elijah," Officer Chin said, turning to him with a small smile. "The description you gave us, especially the detail about the scar, helped us identify the suspect. Once we had him in custody, he led us to his accomplices." Elijah felt a strange mix of pride and horror. His actions had helped catch these criminals, but the reality of what they had been planning was almost too much to bear. "There's more," Officer Chin continued. "In breaking up this ring, we've uncovered evidence of similar operations in other states. Elijah, your bravery didn't just save Lily. You've helped us rescue other children and prevent future kidnappings across the country." The weight of this revelation settled over the room like a heavy blanket. Elijah's parents looked at him with a mixture of pride and concern, while he struggled to process the enormity of what he'd done. "What happens now?" Elijah asked, his voice small. Officer Chin leaned forward, her expression serious but kind. "Now, we make sure these criminals face justice. There will be a trial, and we may need you to testify about what happened that day. But I want you to know, Elijah, that you've done an incredibly brave and important thing. You're a hero. As Officer Chen left, promising to keep them updated on the case, Elijah's family sat in stunned silence. The relief of knowing the immediate danger had passed was tempered by the shocking reality of how close they had come to true tragedy. Elijah's mom pulled him into a tight hug, tears streaming down her face. "Oh, my brave boy," she whispered. "I'm so proud of you, but I'm so sorry you had to go through this." His dad joined the hug, his strong arms encircling them both. "You did good, son," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "You did real good." As the news spread through the neighborhood, a palpable sense of relief washed over Maplewood Estates. Parents allowed their children to play outside again, and the constant tension that had gripped the community began to ease. But for Elijah, the impact of what had happened, and what could have happened, lingered. That evening, as he sat on his front porch, he saw Lily step hesitantly out of her house. Their eyes met across the street, and without a word, she ran over to him. "Is it true?" she asked breathlessly. "Did they really catch the bad man?" Elijah nodded, managing a small smile. "Yeah, they did. He can't hurt anyone anymore." Lily threw her arms around him, hugging him tightly. "Thank you, Elijah," she whispered. "You're my hero." As he hugged her back, Elijah felt a fierce surge of protectiveness. He knew that the world could be a dangerous place, full of shadows and threats he'd never imagined. But he also knew that there were people like Officer Chen, like his parents, like himself, who would stand up to that darkness. "I'll always look out for you, Lily," he promised again, his voice steady and sure. "For you, and for everyone else who needs help. That's what heroes do." As the sun set over Maplewood Estates, casting long shadows across the quiet streets, Elijah realized that something fundamental had changed within him. He had faced true evil and come out stronger. He had made a difference, not just in his own community, but for children he would never meet. The road ahead would be challenging. There would be difficult conversations, maybe even a trial where he'd have to face the man who had tried to take Lily. But Elijah knew he would face it all with courage and determination. For now, though, he was content to sit on his porch with Lily, watching as their neighbors emerged from their homes, tentatively at first, then with growing confidence. Children's laughter once again filled the air, and parents chatted easily on front lawns. Maplewood Estates was healing, coming back to life after weeks of fear and suspicion. And at the heart of that healing was a 10-year-old boy who had found the courage to stand up to evil, to protect those who couldn't protect themselves. As night fell and fireflies began to dance in the gathering darkness, Elijah made a silent vow. He would carry this experience with him, using it to fuel his determination to make the world a better, safer place. He didn't know exactly how he would do it. Maybe he'd become a police officer like Officer Chen, or a lawyer fighting for justice, or maybe he'd find some other way to help people. But one thing was certain: Elijah had discovered a strength within himself that he never knew existed. And he was determined to use that strength to shine a light in the darkest corners of the world, to stand up for those who couldn't stand up for themselves. As Lily's parents called her home for dinner, she gave Elijah one last hug. "Will you walk me to school on Monday?" she asked, her eyes still holding a hint of lingering fear. Elijah nodded, ruffling her hair affectionately. "Of course I will. Every day if you want." As he watched Lily skip back to her house, Elijah felt a sense of purpose settle over him. The world might be bigger and scarier than he'd once thought, but he now knew that one person, even a kid like him, could make a real difference. With a deep breath, Elijah stood up and walked into his house, ready to face whatever challenges the future might hold. He had learned the true meaning of bravery, and he would carry that lesson with him for the rest of his life. The night settled over Maplewood Estates, peaceful once more. And in the heart of that peace was a young hero, forever changed by his brush with darkness, but more determined than ever to be a force for good in the world. Elijah's journey was just beginning, and the impact of his courage would ripple out far beyond the borders of his small community, touching lives he could never have imagined. The day of the trial arrived, casting a solemn air over Maplewood Estates. Elijah stood in front of his bedroom mirror, adjusting the tie his father had helped him put on. His reflection stared back at him, a mix of nervousness and determination in his eyes. "You ready, champ?" his dad asked, appearing in the doorway. Elijah took a deep breath and nodded. "I think so. I'm scared, but I know I have to do this." His father squeezed his shoulder reassuringly. "That's what real bravery is, son. Being afraid, but doing what's right anyway." The courthouse loomed large and imposing as they approached. Elijah's steps faltered for a moment, but then he caught sight of a familiar face. Lily was standing with her parents near the entrance, and when she saw him, her face lit up with a smile. "Elijah," she called, running to give him a hug. "You can do this. I believe in you." Her words gave him strength, and Elijah squared his shoulders as they entered the building. The courtroom was packed, and as they made their way to their seats, Elijah was surprised to see how many familiar faces were there. It seemed like half of Maplewood Estates had shown up to support him. As the trial began, Elijah listened intently to the proceedings, his heart racing every time the defendants were mentioned. When it was finally his turn to testify, he walked to the witness stand on shaky legs. "Please state your name for the record," the prosecutor said gently. "Elijah Martinez," he replied, his voice surprisingly steady. "Elijah, can you tell us what happened on the afternoon of October 15th? Taking a deep breath, Elijah began to recount the events of that terrifying day. His voice trembled at first, but grew stronger as he spoke. He described hearing Lily scream, seeing the man dragging her towards the woods, and the split-second decision to act. "I was really scared," he admitted, "but I knew I had to do something. Lily needed help, and I was the only one there." As he described throwing rocks and yelling to distract the kidnapper, Elijah caught sight of Lily in the audience. She gave him an encouraging nod, and he felt a surge of strength. "What happened after Lily got away from the man?" the prosecutor asked. "He looked really angry," Elijah said. "For a second, I thought he might come after me. But then we heard people coming, and he ran into the woods." The defense attorney tried to poke holes in Elijah's story, suggesting that maybe he had misunderstood what he saw. But Elijah stood firm, his voice clear and unwavering as he recounted every detail. When he finally stepped down from the witness stand, Elijah felt drained but proud. He had done it. He had faced his fears and told the truth. The trial continued for several more days, with other witnesses taking the stand and evidence being presented. Elijah attended every day, sitting with his parents and the Thompsons, all of them anxiously awaiting the verdict. Finally, after what felt like an eternity of deliberation, the jury returned. The courtroom fell silent as the foreman stood. "On the charge of attempted kidnapping, we find the defendant guilty." A collective sigh of relief swept through the room. Elijah felt tears prick his eyes as the reality sank in. It was over. They had won. As the judge prepared to announce the sentence, he turned his attention to Elijah. "Young man, please stand," he said, his voice kind but authoritative. Elijah rose on shaky legs, his heart pounding. "Elijah Martinez, this court and this community owe you a debt of gratitude," the judge began. "Your bravery and quick thinking not only saved a life, but helped bring dangerous criminals to justice. You are a true hero, and your actions have prevented future tragedies. I hope you will always remember the courage you showed that day." Elijah felt a lump form in his throat as the judge's words sank in. Around him, he could hear sniffles and murmurs of agreement from the audience. As they left the courthouse, Elijah was engulfed in a sea of hugs and congratulations. Mrs. Thompson held him tight, tears streaming down her face. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you for saving my little girl." The days following the trial were a whirlwind of activity. News of Elijah's bravery spread beyond Maplewood Estates, and suddenly he found himself at the center of attention. Reporters wanted interviews, and strangers stopped him on the street to shake his hand. Through it all, Elijah remained grounded, always remembering the fear and uncertainty of that day. He didn't feel like a hero. He had just done what he thought was right. A week after the trial, the mayor of their town announced that there would be a special ceremony to honor Elijah's bravery. The entire community was invited to attend. On the day of the ceremony, Maplewood Park was transformed. A stage had been set up, decorated with balloons and banners. Rows of chairs filled the grassy area, quickly occupied by friends, neighbors, and even people from neighboring towns who had heard about Elijah's story. As Elijah took his seat on the stage, he felt a flutter of nervousness in his stomach. But then he saw Lily in the front row, beaming up at him, and he felt calm wash over him. The mayor stepped up to the microphone, his voice booming across the park. Ladies and gentlemen, we are here today to celebrate an extraordinary act of courage. Elijah Martinez, a 10-year-old boy from our very own Maplewood Estates, showed us that heroes come in all sizes. As the mayor recounted the events of that fateful day, Elijah found himself transported back to that moment. He remembered the fear, the adrenaline, the desperate need to protect Lily. But now, those memories were tempered with pride and a sense of accomplishment. And now, the mayor continued, I'd like to invite Police Chief Davis to the stage for a special presentation. Chief Davis, a tall woman with kind eyes, approached Elijah with a smile. In her hands, she held a framed certificate. Elijah Martinez, she began, her voice filled with warmth. On behalf of the Maplewood Police Department, it is my honor to present you with this certificate of valor. Your courage and quick thinking in the face of danger exemplify the very best of our community. Thank you for your bravery. As Chief Davis handed him the certificate, the crowd erupted in applause. Elijah felt overwhelmed, tears pricking at his eyes as he stared at the ornate document in his hands. The mayor returned to the microphone. Elijah's actions remind us that a single act of courage, even from a child, can change many lives. He not only saved young Lily Thompson, but also helped bring down a criminal network that threatened children across the country. Elijah, you've made Maplewood proud, and you've shown us all what it means to be a true hero. As the ceremony concluded, Elijah found himself surrounded by well-wishers. But there was one person he was especially eager to see. He scanned the crowd until he spotted Lily, clutching something to her chest. Elijah, she called, running up to him. I made something for you. She thrust a colorful, handmade book into his hands. It's a scrapbook, she explained shyly. To say thank you for being my hero. Elijah opened the book, his heart swelling with emotion. Each page was filled with Lily's drawings, pictures of him as a superhero, the two of them playing together, and written notes expressing her gratitude and love. This is the best gift ever, Lily, Elijah said, his voice thick with emotion. Thank you. As they hugged, Elijah heard sniffles from the adults around them. Mrs. Thompson wiped tears from her eyes, while his own parents beamed with pride. In the days that followed, life in Maplewood Estates began to return to normal. But for Elijah, things would never be quite the same. He felt different, older, more responsible, more aware of the world around him. One afternoon, as he sat on his front porch flipping through Lily's scrapbook, his dad joined him. How you doing, son? He asked, settling into the chair next to him. Elijah considered the question for a moment. I'm okay, he said slowly. But sometimes I still get scared, thinking about what happened. Is that normal? His dad nodded, putting an arm around Elijah's shoulders. Absolutely. Being brave doesn't mean you're never afraid. It means you do what's right even when you are afraid. And that's exactly what you did. Elijah leaned into his father's embrace, feeling a sense of peace wash over him. I think I understand now, he said. Bravery isn't about being fearless. It's about facing your fears and doing what's right anyway. His dad squeezed his shoulder. That's right, son. And I couldn't be more proud of you for learning that lesson. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across their quiet street, Elijah felt a newfound sense of purpose. He knew now that he wanted to continue helping others, to be a protector for those who needed it. Dad, he said, sitting up straight, I think I know what I want to be when I grow up. Oh yeah? What's that? Elijah smiled, a determined glint in his eye. A police officer, like Officer Chen. I want to help keep people safe, just like I did for Lily. His dad nodded, a proud smile spreading across his face. I think you'd make an excellent police officer, Elijah. You've already got the most important qualities: courage, compassion, and a strong sense of right and wrong. As they sat there, watching the neighborhood children play in the late afternoon sun, Elijah felt a sense of contentment wash over him. He knew that the road ahead might not always be easy, but he was ready to face whatever challenges came his way. The next morning, as Elijah walked to school with Lily by his side, he looked at the familiar streets of Maplewood Estates with new eyes. This wasn't just his neighborhood anymore. It was a community he had helped protect, and he was determined to keep doing so in whatever way he could. Elijah, Lily said, tugging on his sleeve, Will you always be my hero? Elijah smiled down at her, feeling a surge of protective affection. Always, Lily, he promised. And you know what? I think you're pretty heroic too. It takes courage to trust someone and to keep being kind even after scary things happen. Lily beamed at him, her eyes shining with admiration and trust. As they continued their walk, Elijah realized that his act of bravery hadn't just changed his own life. It had touched everyone around him. He had shown his community the power of courage, the importance of looking out for one another. As they reached the school, Elijah saw a group of younger kids huddled together, looking nervous. Without hesitation, he approached them. "Hey guys," he said warmly. "Everything okay?" One of the boys looked up at him, recognition dawning in his eyes. "You're Elijah, right? The one who saved that girl?" Elijah nodded, feeling a mix of pride and humility. "That's me. What's going on here?" The kids exchanged glances before one of them spoke up. "We're scared of walking home alone. After what happened." Understanding immediately, Elijah knelt down to their level. "I get it. It's okay to be scared sometimes. But you know what? We look out for each other here. How about I help organize a walking buddy system? No one has to walk alone, and we can all keep an eye out for each other." The children's faces lit up, fear giving way to excitement at the idea. As Elijah helped them plan out the buddy system, he felt a warm glow of satisfaction. This was what it meant to be a hero, not just in big, dramatic moments, but in the small, everyday acts of kindness and protection. As the school day began, Elijah took his seat in class, feeling more focused and determined than ever before. He knew now that he had the power to make a difference, to stand up for what was right, and to protect those who needed help. The events of that terrifying day had changed him, yes, but they had also revealed a strength he never knew he possessed. And as he looked around at his classmates, at Lily smiling at him from across the room, at the community that had rallied around him, Elijah knew one thing for certain. He was ready for whatever challenges life might bring, because now he understood that true heroism wasn't about capes or superpowers. It was about having the courage to do what's right, even when it's scary. And that was a lesson he would carry with him for the rest of his life. As the teacher began the day's lesson, Elijah sat up straight, ready to learn and grow. He was no longer just a kid from Maplewood Estates. He was Elijah Martinez, friend, protector, and hero. And he was just getting started. As we close Elijah's story, we see that his courage and quick thinking not only saved Lily, but helped bring dangerous criminals to justice. His bravery reminds us all that standing up for what's right can change lives. If this story moved you, let us know in the comments. How do you think you'd react in Elijah's place? We'd love to hear your thoughts. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button for more stories of courage and hope. Thanks for watching, and until next time, stay brave and look out for one another.